What happens after death? This is a question that humanity has asked since the beginning of time. Many believe they have the answer, but what if someone who experienced it came back to tell what they saw? Today, I will share with you a true story, an account that might change the way you view your faith. So, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because this story deserves to be heard until the very end. Since childhood, I felt a calling to serve God. While my friends dreamed of becoming doctors, engineers, or artists, I knew that my mission was different. Over time, that calling led me to become a priest and eventually to reach a position of great responsibility within the church. I spent my life studying the scriptures, guiding the faithful, and preserving traditions that had existed for centuries. For me, faith was based on obedience, structure, and devotion to the church. People trusted me. They sought my advice, followed my guidance, and saw me as a spiritual leader. On Sundays, I was there, in front of the congregation, delivering sermons, leading prayers, and performing sacred rituals. I taught about the commandments, about the importance of remaining faithful, and about the security of following the church's teachings. But there was something I had never admitted to anyone. Deep down, I felt empty. It wasn't a constant feeling, and I couldn't explain it clearly. But there were nights when, alone in my office, I would look at the Bible open in front of me and wonder why I did not feel God's presence in the way I taught others to feel it. I spent years talking about Him, guiding people on the path of faith, but deep inside, a persistent doubt lodged itself within me. Did I really know God, or did I only know about Him? I tried to convince myself that it was just exhaustion, the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. After all, it was normal to feel drained when so many people depended on me, but no matter how much I pushed these doubts to the back of my mind, they always returned. I believed that following the church, maintaining its traditions, and leading the faithful was the right path, but then came the night that would change everything. It was a warm night, and I had spent the entire day in meetings, taking care of the church's affairs and preparing for the next sermon. When I finally sat in my office, exhausted, I opened my Bible, but I wasn't really reading. I was merely leafing through its pages, as if fulfilling a mechanical duty, something I had done countless times before. I decided to pray, but before I could begin, a sudden tightness gripped my chest. The pain was intense, overwhelming, as if something were holding me, suffocating me. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air simply wouldn't come. My vision started to darken, my legs weakened, and I knew in that moment that something very serious was happening. I tried to call for help, but my voice wouldn't come out. My legs gave way, and I collapsed on the floor, feeling my heart beating uncontrollably. I heard distant voices, hurried footsteps entering the room, hands touching my body as everything around me grew increasingly blurry. Then, suddenly, everything fell silent. What happened next was something I could never have imagined. I was looking down at my own body. I was floating above the scene like a distant observer, watching the church members around me trying to resuscitate me. I saw everything clearly, but I felt nothing. No pain, no emotion, only an absolute void. Soon the paramedics arrived and began trying to bring me back. I saw them attach equipment around me, check my vital signs, and then announce something that should have terrified me. My heart had stopped. One of the rescuers positioned the defibrillator on my chest and shouted, "Clear!" My body trembled with the electrical discharge, but I remained there, merely watching, disconnected from everything. Again, another attempt. Another shock of electricity coursed through my inert body, but nothing happened. I observed it all, yet I no longer felt part of that moment. It was like watching a movie in which I was the main character, but without any control over the story. Then something began to happen. Something I could never have foreseen. Suddenly, I felt a force pulling me away from that room. The environment around me started to distort, the voices and images growing more and more distant. An intense cold enveloped me, and for the first time since I left my body, I felt something real: fear. I had always believed that upon dying there would be peace. I spent my life teaching about eternal rest, about the certainty of salvation. But at that moment, there was no peace, there was no rest, only a profound emptiness, a darkness that seemed alive, closing in around me. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was certain: I was not in the presence of God. At first, the darkness was just a subtle shadow around me, but as I was dragged deeper into it, everything became denser, more oppressive. There was no ground, no sky, only an infinite abyss. And then I felt something even worse. I was not alone. There was something there, something I couldn't see, but I could feel. It was as if the darkness itself were alive, whispering words that infiltrated my mind. You were never worthy. You followed rules, but you never knew the truth. You preached about the light, but you never walked in it. Each phrase was like a blade, cutting through my soul, revealing something I did not want to accept. I had always taken pride in my faith, but now I saw that maybe I had never truly known God. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness was pulling me into an endless void, and I understood with overwhelming dread that I was lost. I had spent my entire life preaching about God, but now he was distant, and I didn't know how to find him. But then something changed. In the midst of that suffocating darkness, a light appeared. Small at first, like a distant spark, but growing with each passing moment. Unlike the shadow that enveloped me, this light was real, alive, and carried an indescribable force. The closer it came, the more the darkness retreated, as if fleeing. And for the first time since I left my body, I felt something beyond fear: hope. The light continued growing until everything around me was bathed in its intense glow. But this was no ordinary light. It was a presence. I didn't just see it, I felt it. It was strong, warm, as if every part of my being were exposed before it. And then, in the midst of that overwhelming brightness, I saw him. I didn't need any explanation. My heart immediately recognized who was before me. It was Jesus Christ, the very same Jesus about whom I had preached all my life, the name I repeated in prayers, the Savior I had taught so many to follow. But now, standing before him, a truth struck me like lightning. I knew him by name, but I had never truly known him. He was before me, and his presence was indescribable. At the same time that I felt an unparalleled love, I also felt an immense weight upon my soul. His glory was so intense that it seemed impossible to stand before him. His gaze was profound, as if he saw every detail of my existence, every thought, every intention of my heart. I wanted to speak, I wanted to justify myself, but before I could say anything, he called my name: Elias. The sound of his voice was like thunder and at the same time like a river of peace coursing through my being. He knew me more than anyone had ever known me, but his next words cut through my soul like a sharp blade. You knew about me, but you never knew me. It was as if a mirror had been placed before me, reflecting not who I thought I was, but who I truly had been throughout my life. I saw before me all the times I had preached about God, yet without truly seeking him. I saw the moments when I taught about love and compassion, but in my heart, I judged those who were different from me. I saw how I had lived imprisoned by religion, but had never truly surrendered to Christ. Then, like a flood, images of my life passed before my eyes. I saw believers who came to me in search of God, but all I gave them were rules, doctrines, traditions. I had led people to the church, but not to Jesus. At that moment, the pain in my soul was unbearable. I was not who I thought I was. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to find words, but nothing I said could change the truth. I thought I was serving God, but in reality, I was serving a system. I followed rules, but I never truly sought him. I saw the people who trusted me, who came in search of an encounter with Christ, but left only with empty rituals. I taught obedience to the church, but I did not teach true love for God. My heart broke as I saw how many opportunities I had wasted. And then Jesus showed me something even more terrifying. I saw multitudes before the throne of God. Many of them were people who had spent their lives believing they were saved. Some were religious leaders, pastors, priests, bishops. All were convinced that they knew God. But then the most feared words were spoken, "Take yourselves away from me, for I never knew you." Desperation took hold of me. How many times had I read those words in the Bible? How many times had I preached them to others without ever imagining they could apply to me? Now, before the truth, I saw what really mattered. It wasn't the traditions. It wasn't the positions within the church. It was him. It always was him. I threw myself at Jesus' feet, tears streaming down my face. "Lord, I did not know. I thought I was doing the right thing." My voice came out weak, overwhelmed by the pain of a lifetime of mistakes. But Jesus only looked at me with a love so deep it hurt even more. "Many believe they follow me, but they never knew me." His words echoed within me like thunder. How many were in the same situation as I? How many trusted in a system, but never had a real relationship with him? Then Jesus extended his hand, and in an instant, everything changed. I saw my life pass before my eyes, but now from his perspective. Every sermon I preached, every piece of advice I gave, every decision I made, everything was laid bare. But what struck me most was seeing the people who had sought me out in search of the truth. They wanted God, but I gave them rules. They wanted salvation, but I delivered traditions. The weight of this reality was crushing. I had always believed I was serving God, but now I saw that I had spent my life serving an institution. And the worst part, how many had I driven away from true faith without even realizing it? Guilt consumed me. But then something happened that I never expected. Jesus looked at me and said, "It is not too late." A breath of hope arose within me. It's not too late. My mind tried to comprehend what those words meant. I had already died. I had left my body behind. How could there be a second chance? But before I could ask, I felt something change. The brightness around me began to fade, and the vision before me dissolved like mist in the wind. Suddenly, I was in another place. I saw the world as it truly was. Churches full of people yet with empty hearts. Preachers talking about blessings, but never about repentance. Multitudes following traditions, but not knowing Christ. And then I saw something even worse. Many were convinced they were saved, but they were not. They thought that their works, their titles, or their church attendance were enough. But what truly mattered, a real relationship with Jesus, was missing. The scene before me was devastating. I saw packed churches, people raising their hands, singing praises, participating in services and masses. But their hearts were far from God. They followed a religious routine, but they never had a true encounter with Christ. Then I saw something even more distressing. I saw religious leaders, pastors, priests, bishops, preaching beautiful words, conducting impeccable ceremonies. But without any genuine connection to God. They spoke about him, but did not know him. Jesus' words echoed in my mind. "Many believe they follow me, but they never knew me." My heart broke. How many people were losing eternity because they were trapped in religion, but never truly sought God? Then I saw something that made me shudder. I saw people who, on the last day, would stand before God's throne, convinced that they would be accepted. I saw their faces contort in horror when they heard the words that shattered all their certainties. "Take yourselves away from me. I never knew you." Terror took hold of me. I had preached all my life about heaven and salvation, but now I saw how many were blindly walking toward condemnation. And worse, how many had I helped lose their way without realizing it? I remembered the sermons I gave, the guidance I offered, the rules I imposed. But how many of those who passed through the church doors truly found Jesus? Then Jesus spoke again, his voice carrying both pain and love. You led many to religion, but few to me. The truth of his words hit me like an overwhelming wave. I had always thought I was fulfilling my mission, but in reality, I was only perpetuating a system. I had memorized the scriptures, defended doctrines, followed traditions. But I had not lived in true communion with him. I had knowledge, but not intimacy. And how many others were making the same mistake without realizing it? The images before me continued to unfold like a revelation impossible to ignore. I saw churches erected like fortresses of tradition, but empty of God's presence. I saw the faithful coming and going week after week, reciting memorized prayers, participating in rituals, but without any real transformation. And then I saw something even more painful. The people who had trusted me, who had sought answers in my words, but left without finding the truth. The pain in my chest grew. I'd always believed that my role was to guide people on the right path, but now I realized that many were led only to religious practices, not to a true encounter with Jesus. I saw the faces of men and women who had come to me with sincere questions, seeking something deeper, but I fed them doctrines and rules when I should have led them to God's presence. Guilt crushed me. How many had been deceived, not out of malice, but out of ignorance? How many had died thinking they were saved, only to discover, too late, that they had never truly known the Lord? My tears flowed uncontrollably. I saw people who trusted me, who believed I was leading them to God, but in truth, I had only taught them to follow a system. I saw believers who spent their lives in the church, dedicated to religious activities, yet never truly surrendered to Christ. And now they stood before God's throne, waiting to hear words of welcome, only to be rejected. I wanted to scream, to protest, to find a justification for it all, but the truth was inescapable. It wasn't just those faithful who were deceived. I was deceived too. I had spent my life believing I was serving God, but now I saw that I was only serving a religious structure. I knew him by name, I spoke about him, I taught about him, but I never truly knew him. And there, in his presence, I understood that faith wasn't about a position, a title, or a set of rules. It was about a real, deep relationship with Christ. Then, Jesus came closer to me, and for the first time since it all began, I felt something different. His gaze was not one of condemnation, but of a deep love, a love that penetrated me completely. Even in the face of all my mistakes, he did not reject me. But there was something in his eyes that made me tremble. Sadness. Not for him, but for me, for everything I had wasted, for all the opportunities I had let slip by. Then, he raised his hand, and immediately, visions began to form before me. I saw what my life could have been if I had truly known him. I saw moments when he tried to speak to me, to call me closer, but I was too busy following rules, too busy upholding traditions. I saw the people who passed through my life seeking an encounter with God and who could have found the truth if I had taught what really mattered. But I was blind. And now, all those opportunities lay before me, not as simple moments, but as open wounds, bleeding with regret. The weight of the truth was overwhelming. I saw before me all the chances I had to truly seek God, which I had wasted in the name of routine, religious duty, and the position I held. And there, before Jesus, I understood something I had never seen before. Faith is not about knowing the rules, it is about knowing him. I trembled. Lord, I was mistaken. I thought I was serving you. My voice faltered with the pain of repentance, but Jesus only looked at me with a love so deep that it made my heart break even more. You learned about me, but you never knew me. Many do the same. They follow traditions, perform rituals, but their hearts are far from me. His words echoed within me like thunder. How many were living as I had? How many were convinced they were on the right path, only to discover they were far from God? Then a new vision appeared before me. I saw multitudes of people, believers in their churches, performing their prayers, participating in ceremonies, but with empty eyes. They were physically present, but their hearts were distant. There was no passion, no surrender, only a repetition of customs, of memorized words, but lifeless. And then I saw something even more terrifying. I saw religious leaders, preachers, priests, and pastors guiding these multitudes, yet like me, they had never truly known Jesus. They spoke about him, but did not seek him. They preached about salvation, but never surrendered their hearts. And the most painful part was that many of these leaders were convinced they were serving God, when in reality they were merely upholding a lifeless system. My heart weighed heavier than ever. I saw the deception before me, a deception so great that it spread through countless churches and congregations. I saw people dedicated to religion, yet they never had a real encounter with Christ. I saw leaders who believed they were saving souls, but in truth, they were only leading people to empty rituals. The worst part was that they didn't even realize it. They believed they were doing the right thing, just as I had believed. Then, I saw something even more terrible. Judgment Day. I saw people approaching God's throne with confidence, believing they would be received with joy. They spoke about the years they had spent in the church, about the work they had done, about how well they had followed the rules. But then I heard the words that completely froze me. Take yourselves away from me. I never knew you. Desperation took over their faces. They pleaded, tried to argue, but it was too late. I wanted to look away, to run from that vision, but I couldn't. It was a reality I had never seen while I was alive. I saw people who had dedicated themselves to religion, who had followed every rule, but who never truly knew Jesus. They thought they were safe, that they were on the right path, until they realized too late that they never had a real relationship with God. Tears burned my face. I could have been one of them. I could have been among that group of religious leaders, of people who dedicated their lives to faith, but in the end were lost. My voice failed when I tried to speak. Lord, what can I do? Jesus looked deeply into my eyes and then said the words that would change everything. It is not too late. I froze. It is not too late. How could that be possible? I had already died. My body was on the floor. The doctors were trying to resuscitate me. How could there be a second chance? Then I felt something different. The presence of Jesus before me was as real as the floor beneath my feet, but now there was something new, hope. Before I could ask what he meant, everything around me began to change. The light around me shone intensely, and then, as if being pulled back, I felt my body dragged with an irresistible force. The brightness of his presence began to dissolve, and the world around me transformed. I was no longer in that space between life and death. I was returning. Suddenly, everything went dark. My body seemed to plummet, as if being sucked back into reality. I felt an enormous pressure on my chest, as if something were pulling me back. Then, in an instant, everything exploded in a violent shock. My lungs filled with air, and a deep sigh tore through my throat. My eyes snapped open. I was back. The white ceiling of a hospital was above me, lights flickered, and the sound of machines and agitated voices filled the space. Doctors and nurses rushed to my side, astonished. A nurse held my hand, her eyes wide. "He's back!" she exclaimed, hardly believing it. I had died, and now, against all logic, I was alive again. My mind was still confused, trying to process everything that had happened. I had truly been before Jesus. I saw the truth. saw what happens after death, but now I was here, back in my body, feeling my heart beat in my chest as if it were fighting to keep up with everything I had experienced. But why? Why did I receive a second chance? The doctors began running tests, murmuring among themselves about how it was a miracle that I was alive. "Your vital functions are normal," one said, shaking his head in disbelief. "There are no signs of damage. It doesn't make sense." But to me, it did. I didn't come back by accident. I was sent back. Jesus gave me a mission, and I knew exactly what I had to do. In the following days, as I recovered in the hospital, my mind couldn't rest. I had seen what few had the chance to see. I knew the truth. But how could I share it? How could I tell people that I, a church leader, spent my entire life preaching rules and traditions, yet never truly knew Jesus? How could I admit that I was lost myself? The answer came quickly. I couldn't remain silent. The first opportunity arose when some priests and bishops from the church came to visit me. They were curious about my miraculous recovery, but I knew I had to speak of something much greater than that. I took a deep breath, looked them in the eyes and said, "I need to tell you what happened when I died." Silence took over the room. Some of the bishops exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others simply waited for me to continue. Then, without hesitation, I told everything. I spoke about leaving my body, about the darkness that enveloped me, about the voices that echoed within me, revealing that I had never truly known God. I recounted the presence of Jesus, the pain of seeing how many people were living a hollow faith, based on rituals and not on a real relationship with Him. As soon as I finished, the impact was immediate. Some turned pale, others seemed uncomfortable. One of the bishops cleared his throat and said, "You were hallucinating. Your brain suffered extreme stress. These visions weren't real." Another simply shook his head, disbelieving. But one of them, one of the oldest among them, looked me in the eyes and whispered, "What if it is true?" The question hung in the air like a silent thunder. What if it is true? Those who listened to me tried to rationalize, justify, find logical explanations. But I knew. No human logic could deny what I had experienced. I looked at them and spoke firmly. I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know that Jesus brought me back to warn that many are deceived. It is not enough to follow rules. It is not enough to be inside the church. You must truly know Him. But their reaction was what I feared. Some stood up, visibly disturbed. One murmured, "This is dangerous. You might shake the faith of many people." But the truth was another. The faith of many was already shaken, because it was never built upon a real relationship with Christ. Days passed, and my conviction only grew. I could no longer be the same. The experience I had completely changed my vision about God, about faith, and about what it truly means to follow Him. I could no longer cling to empty rituals or fear what others might think. My mission now was to speak the truth, no matter the cost. When I finally returned to the church for my first sermon after the near-death experience, I felt the weight of the moment. Many expected me to simply thank God for the miracle and continue as before, but I knew I couldn't do that. So I stood before the congregation, looked at those familiar faces and said, "Today I will not speak about religion. Today I will speak about Jesus, and what I have to say could change your eternity." The room fell into absolute silence. People were not used to hearing me speak this way. I had always been a man of tradition, of liturgy, of the formal teachings of the church. But now, something inside me had changed. I was not there to keep up appearances. I was there to speak the truth. Then I began to tell everything. I spoke about my death, about how I saw myself outside of my body, about the darkness that enveloped me. I recounted the despair of realizing that despite a lifetime serving the church, I had never truly known Jesus. And with a firm voice, I looked at everyone and asked the question that Jesus had posed to me: do you truly know Him? The reactions were varied. Some looked at me in astonishment, others with discomfort. I saw in many eyes the internal struggle between what they had always believed and the truth I was sharing. Some lowered their heads, others began to cry. But there were also those who crossed their arms, resistant, unable to accept that everything they had lived for could have been based solely on rituals, without a real relationship with Christ. I continued. I spoke about the vision I had of judgment, of the multitudes who believed they were safe but were rejected. I told them that Jesus does not want people who are merely trapped in traditions. He wants children who know him, who speak with him, who truly love him. I did the only thing I could at that moment. I called everyone there to seek a real encounter with God. Silence reigned in the church for a moment. Then, something unexpected happened. Some people began to kneel. Others wept softly. I saw in their eyes the same despair I had felt when I was before Jesus. Many there realized that they had spent years in the church, yet had never sought a true relationship with God. At the same time, I knew I would face opposition. Other church leaders began to look at me with suspicion. A few weeks after that sermon, I was called to a meeting with members of the hierarchy. They told me that I was causing confusion, that my message was dangerous, that I was questioning tradition. But I knew the truth. What really bothered them was not my story. It was the fact that many people were awakening to what truly matters. The pressures increased. They tried to convince me to stop talking about my experience, to return to traditional sermons, to maintain order within the church. But how could I do that? I had been before Jesus. I saw the truth. I knew what happens to those who live a hollow faith. No matter the cost, I could not remain silent, and so I began sharing my story with more people. I recorded testimonies, spoke to other congregations, met people who, like me, had spent their lives within religion, yet had never truly known God. And for every person who listened to me, I asked the same question. If you died today, would Jesus say that he knows you? Now I stand before you sharing this story because I know there are many living exactly as I once did. Many believe they are safe merely by attending church, by following traditions, by doing good works. But the most important question remains the same. Do you truly know Jesus? I was rescued from death to bring this warning. There is no more time to live a superficial faith. There is no more time to merely follow customs without seeking a real relationship with God. One day we will all stand before him, and when that moment comes, the only thing that will truly matter will be, does Jesus know you? If this story made you reflect, then do not ignore this call. Seek to truly know Jesus, not just to follow a system. This could change your eternity. Stay tuned. We have new videos every day here on the channel, so subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and see you tomorrow.